Right here we're trying to cure something that's commonly called a short arbor problem. It's not really a short arbor. It's that Uberti drills the arbor hole in the barrel assembly too deeply. They seem to think that that's just fine, that will, just to making a tight fitting diameter wise arbor in the arbor hole will be enough. Problem is you never get a consistent seating depth for the barrel. If anybody's ever had one of these replicas, and they seem to have to position the wedge just so, they can only tap it in so far. They tap it in too far, it binds up the cylinder. Too loose, obviously there's not enough tension in it, wants to fall out. That's because the hole is too deep in the barrel assembly. You should be able to knock that wedge in, and no matter how hard you knock that wedge, that barrel assembly shouldn't move. That's what it ought to be. But unfortunately, there's enough give in the steel where if you've got too much room, too much space, and you knock the wedge on deeper, it'll actually cause the barrel assembly to flex upward. It'll still try to pull it tight, and your cylinder gap will be lopsided. All I've done here is just stone the face of this so that I can expose the very center. This makes it nice. I don't have to find the center of this because I'm getting ready to center punch this. I'm going to be drilling a hole right down to the center of this arbor. About perfect. Nice and deep, and give that drill bit plenty to bite into. Normally you would drill a smaller pilot hole first. Since my smaller drill bit is dull, so this will have to do. I just hope I've got this centered well. What we have here. That looks pretty good. That's M1 eyeball center anyway. This is a job that I've been putting off, but I'm just going to have to get to. Thought I might as well film what I'm doing. I've seen other videos where, I've seen examples of other people's cap and ball revolvers on internet forums and the like, where they've had these cap rakes installed, and it does involve drilling a hole right here, and a lot of gunsmiths will insert a pin. That could very well be best practices to do that. They'll install a pin right here, and if you look underneath that section, that's not a lot of steel right there. Not a lot of steel at all. No depth to it. Where you would have to have the pin, it would just be sticking into, I think, rather thin steel. I mean, I'm sure if you made it a nice tight fit and you clean the bottom off really nicely, it'd probably be okay. And I don't know if you just glue it in there with JB Weld or something. It's tempting to do that. It really is tempting to do that.
Since I already had a very good drill bit and a tap for this 8/32 size set screw, I was thinking about that today. If I were to drill that hole exactly even with the two faces of these, and then go ahead and tap this in there, then as far as my finishing operation, all I have to do is file the sides. That way I've got not just a round pin, but kind of a little sail that would stick up. Of course, I'll have to deepen this notch considerably to get past it. What I want to try to avoid is having to widen it any. Well, anyway, I'm going to try to film as much as I can of this. It's kind of a pain in the butt filming it, but oh, this is just an example. Look what I had to do to the arbor. Look how much material I had to add to the arbor to get this thing to bottom out. That's how much free space I have between the end of the arbor and the end of the hole that's drilled into the barrel assembly for it. So that's quite a lot. The internals, that's why I'm doing this now. I need to do an action job on it, and I just might as well get the drilling and tapping and grinding out of the way before I even do that. That seems like an awfully small cam notch on that hammer. I don't know if it's supposed to be like that or not. Well, originally it was a hardened pin that was driven in there to act as a cam lobe. And you can replace these with a hardened pin. You have to file them flat and drill it out again, but I don't know. We'll see how that, and it seems like they're making them differently. You can tell just from the machining. We'll see how that responds to action work. I didn't even cock it all the way the first time. Everything felt so rough, I just stopped and said I'm not even going to mess with this till I have the time and the wherewithal to do an action job on it. The internal parts are full of burrs, as I would come to expect. Well, sharp edges anyway. So it'll be interesting for me to set one up from the very get-go. Looks like the only fitting they've really done to this here was just did a little bit of grinding, I guess, to keep this from rubbing on the edge of the slot. Yeah, that could use a lot of work. But let's get this hard stuff out of the way. Well, that's a bigger hole than you were probably expecting to see. Since again, I think most gunsmiths would drill a much smaller hole and just install a pin. And once again, I have to tap a hole. What's scary about this is a normal tap will strike the arbor before the ever starts cutting into anything. So I had to actually cut the bottom of this tap off a bit. Which means it's very hard to get started and to get started straight. Sorry about the camera angle. There's no other way I had to position the work to where I could access it. Really hard to keep this thing straight. Another successful tapping. If I had my druthers, hole would have been a little bit straighter. Yeah, I'm not real pleased so far how this cap rake is turning out. I think the frame slipped in its mounting a little when I was drilling and it shifted it. I spent a long time getting this thing completely squared up. The hole ended up being drilled a little bit crooked. So when I get done installing this thing, although the base was lined up perfectly, it's going to be angled backwards slightly near the top of it. Well, I created a lot of extra work for myself by not drilling a pilot hole first. And the reason for that was my drill bit's been wearing out. And even the drill bit that I used to drill this hole, I could tell was wearing out. I wasn't getting the nice long spirals of steel. It wasn't cutting through. It was more or less grinding through. And that plus the piece slipping, I guess, a little bit, it caused my hole to be drilled kind of at an angle this way slightly. So I had to tap another hole in a piece of spare steel I had, thread this into there, bend it, and now screw this back into the threaded hole here in the frame. So now I've got it leaning slightly forward, which is fine now. Just a lot of extra work. I have since rectified my drill bit supply, so I shouldn't be running into that anymore when I drill any more holes. Yeah, a pilot hole, if you drill a pilot hole first, that's the way to go. I don't want to apply any heat to this really, because I've already got it Loctited in and it's very sturdy now. Heat might loosen that bond, so looks like I'm just going to be filing this all the way down to where it needs to be. It'll take a long time. Well, I have it fitted for width now. Have to narrow it quite a bit, and mostly for height. I'm going to have to finish deepening the slot in the hammer first before I decide. The height right now is just about even with the hole inside the nipple. I'd like for it to stay about that height if I can. I can get away with shortening it some. The front edge of it is about even with the recoil shield. That's what I was hoping for. I hope I don't end up having to relieve this area here. I may have to. We'll shoot it first and find out. You know, the later models, like the 1851, actually had a groove milled into this area here. Pretty deep grooves, matter of fact, for a spent cap and cap fragments to fall into and not jam up the action. Walkers didn't. I'd kind of like to keep it original in that regard, but if I start having problems, I'll cut me a little cap groove in there. And the little threads, you know, since this was an actual set screw at one time, that's not a big deal. It doesn't bother me a bit. In fact, if anything, it should decrease the amount of actual surface in contact with a spent cap as the cylinder is rotating, so it may actually cause less drag if there were going to be any drag. Yeah. Alright, well that turned out better than the one on my 1851. Of course you have to mill this slot deeper and longer in the hammer. Tried to keep the hammer face from becoming any deeper. Tried to just, instead of being a straight groove, tried to have it kind of humped on the inside, because this is swinging in an arc. Tended to work pretty well. I barely nicked one edge of it here, barely. So I should have good striking surface there on the hammer, and yeah, it's clearing that cap rake just fine. First I thought I needed to go yet deeper. I thought perhaps the hammer bottom ought to bottom out on the shelf there, but put some red marker on the back of the frame and it's transferring to the hammer right here. So looks like I've got a good cap rake there now, and again it's about even with the recoil shield, if not even a little proud. So I'm a little proud of this job. Well, I've done so much work to this already that I'm just going all out now. I'm going to replace the leaf handspring with a plunger spring. Trying out my new drill bits. Starting with a pilot hole. testament to this drill bit or indictment of their steel, but it's cutting through this thing like butter. I can't see. Okay, when I said I couldn't see, I probably implied I'd had some kind of an accident. I just meant that where I had the camera mounted, I could not see how the work was progressing. It was frustrating me. Alright, that's the pilot hole. It looks like it came out drilled right where I want it to be. Now time to enlarge it slightly with a new bit. Oh, it's so nice when you have a pilot hole. I've made the hole as high as I can. I guess I could have made it even higher now, looking at it. Just seemed from my measurements that was about as high as I could go. Yeah. Well, that's my plunger head. It may be too short. It broke shorter than I wanted it to. This is made from the same size drill bit, just the one that happened to be dull. I've done so much filming and so much learning on this. I'm not even sure how I'm going to title this video. Here's where I am right now. I didn't like the fact that the bolt was popping up when I cocked it, that the bolt was popping up exactly in, just about exactly in the notch. It was impacting on the very edge, the very, very edge of the notch when it came up, and then it popped on down. There was a corresponding mark on this side where it looked like sometimes it would pop up just on the very edge. The cylinder was still rotating, the bolt was still on its way up, and the bolt just was barely catching the edge of the notch. It looked like that was a recipe for throw by something fierce. And anyway, it tended to kind of peen the edges of the slot up. I've stoned that back down, and I decided to make the bolt pop up sooner, because in a typical revolver there's a lead cut that goes into there, and it tends to, the perfect way is for the bolt to pop up in that lead. This doesn't have those lead cuts. This was before that was even designed. So I had it pop up sooner. So now, as I cock it, the bolt has now popped up. You don't hear it click, but it's popped up at that point. And if you were to imagine if this was on the underside, the bolt has now popped up, right here on the edge. And then that last little bit, it pops up, it engages the bolt notch in the cylinder. That to me seems like about perfect timing is what I would want. The problem is you've got really easy hammer cocking until the bolt touches the cylinder, and at that point you've got quite a bit of drag, and it really stiffens up the cocking a lot. Now I did install an action stop screw in the grip frame, so it shouldn't be as hard on the gun when you thumb the hammer back hard, but I don't like that. I posted on some forums about that and was basically told by most people, you're doing it wrong. The Walker and first model Dragoon, any of the Colts that just had these little circular stop notches, was designed to be timed almost exact. So they were designed to be timed so that as you were cocking it and it got to about there, just on the very edge of the bolt stop notch, the cylinder stop notch, was when it would come up, and then the last little bit would lock it in there. It doesn't seem like a good idea to me. I was advised to buy a new bolt, that the modifications I'd done to the bolt leg by shortening it so that it would slip off the cam on the hammer a little bit sooner and engage at that spot, that I had essentially ruined the bolt, and that I'd have to buy a new bolt and refit it. I don't know. One person said, no, that's exactly how it's supposed to pop up, about right there. You know, that, if that is about right, that's about perfect. It's about where you want it to be. I don't know. Hard to tell. So, but I've been told by some very knowledgeable cowboy gunsmiths that that is not right. That I should have left it alone and let it pop up exactly into that notch. It just seemed like a recipe for throw-by to me. Because with the plunger modification I did, there's not a whole lot of braking to the cylinder. I mean, I've got a good strong coil spring in there, so there's some braking. It seemed like it would really benefit from some actual drag. Anyway, I'm just right now, rather than order a new bolt, I'm going to do a little bit more polishing on the top of the bolt so that there's less drag, and I may weaken that spring a little bit. I'll cheat for now. I'm just going to use the washer method under the bolt spring, see if I can weaken that a little bit. So, disassembling this again. I suppose this is as good a time as any right now to sort of detail what work we've done to this Uberti Walker replica so far. Was the very first thing I did. One of the very first things I did was to lap the arbor into the barrel hole a little bit. It was ridiculously tight. That didn't take very long. I was just putting a little bit of light polishing compound on it and working it back and forth so that it's a snug fit, but at least I can get it on and off easily enough. I fixed the arbor depth issue by the use of drilling a hole down the center of the arbor, and this is a brass button from a Dillon 650 reloading press. Just about perfect. I had to make a little tiny steel shim. I made it out of some feeler gauges. I made a whole bunch of them, so they're all different thicknesses. Because my adjustment was a little bit off, and so that makes a nice fine adjustment. If this ever wears or deforms or something, I can keep adding washers under there if I need to. But this gets it to the point where, and this particular Uberti had good end shake. It wasn't too bad, so that was nice. But this gets it to the point where I just use a little stick. They say you should just be able to push it on thumb tight and be fine. This is a light stick. It's not whacking it in too deep. I don't know. You can smack that wedge in as deep as you want, and you're not going to bind it up because I've corrected that arbor depth. So I like that. Not a lot of end shake. Pretty tight cylinder cap. That's the first major fix. And set that aside. This button tends to fall out. I need to glue it in, but okay. With the cylinder off, it's a bit stiffer to cock. Sometimes because the ratchets actually keep the hand back a little bit and keep the hand from rubbing on the side of this arbor. It took me a while to figure out what was going on there, but not a big deal. Alright. I've also replaced the flat spring on the back of the hand with this coil spring and plunger arrangement. You'll have to cut me a little bit of slack. I've not seen a whole lot of these. If I had it to do over, and perhaps on subsequent revolvers, if I do a mod like this, I'll have a larger diameter hole, a larger spring, and a larger plunger. But I do it right now. So I don't want to have to take that out while I'm working on this. So I've made a little. I had an old Dragoon many years ago, an old ASM Dragoon back when I was a younger man. I didn't know much about them. I was abusing it and didn't know it. Got all loose, and I tried some Bubba gunsmithing on it and pretty much ruined it. So sometimes I'll cut pieces off of some of the parts if I need a cap and ball gun part. And here I've cut So here I've cut one of the ears off the grip frame so I can work on this with the back strap off and still have the proper tension on my plunger. Why it was so hard that time. I've polished this tip of the mainspring because there's no roller on the hammer, and put a high polish there as well. And with Mobil 1 synthetic grease between the two, it rolls as smooth, it cocks as smooth in that regard as a hammer roller. Adjusting my action stop just a little bit, I noticed it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be. And a quick little overview flashback, that's the action stop that I installed. I do kind of like that mod. That's actually a pretty smart mod. It keeps the last cocking action of the hammer. It stops it physically rather than it just being a case of the hand still trying to turn the cylinder and the cylinder's locked up, and that being the resistance to the last motion of the hammer. I do like that mod. One nice thing I like about these Walkers, all the screws are about the same size. I can pretty much stick with the same screwdriver. I did polish the tips of these. Suppose if somebody wanted to, he could hourglass the bolt spring a little bit, but I'm just going to cheat right now, throw a washer under it. That should lessen it somewhat. If I decide later on that that really is the way to go, slightly weaker bolt spring, then maybe I'll permanently modify the spring. I don't know. Sticking a washer under a spring is really considered kind of a lowbrow way to reduce tension. Alright, there's the bolt. It's pretty smooth as is, but it could be polished smoother for a little bit less drag, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to polish this up as smooth as we can get it without ruining it, and then install a washer under the spring and see if those two together will give me some smoother cocking. It's pretty heavy. This is like a big old flywheel turning when it gets moving. So if you were to cock it smartly enough, it's quite possible, if this is jumping up rather late, that this is still being sprung upward while this is turning, and even though it was released to spring upward at the precise moment to pop up into that hole, with this turning it didn't even bottom out in the hole before it encountered the edge of the notch, and I was getting peening on the edge of the notch, and that was actually causing sticky cocking where I had raised up a bump, so when I cocked it the bolt wasn't even coming all the way out before it was engaging that bump. Stoned the bump down, smoothed those out, kind of shaped them back to where they ought to be, and now I've got the bolt popping up right here on the edge, which to me seems, if it's popping up right there, that to me seems perfect. But I've been told by knowledgeable gunsmiths that work on these that no, it's actually supposed to be timed the way it was, to where it's popping up just slightly before, almost just perfect. Before I order a new bolt, I'm going to work on this, see if I can't polish it up and lighten the spring a little bit so that it can continue popping up on here. It just won't drag so much. Alright, well, that's about as polished as I'm going to get it. Now I don't know, there was already a bevel put into it right here from the factory. I don't know why. I've left it there. I didn't try to do anything with it other than polish it. There's some peculiarities about the Walker bolt I obviously do not understand. Here's where I had to shorten this bolt leg to get it to drop a little bit sooner than it was. So if I've ruined the bolt, that's how I did it. Alright, I've made this little washer, this brass washer. Well, ground a larger brass washer down to fit. That will reduce tension. Of course, it'll also reduce tension on the trigger spring, which isn't necessarily a good thing. So yeah, this is a cheat. A professional would modify a spring or replace a spring. Probably not slap a washer underneath it. Yeah. It's not lessened it very much. Yeah, I don't think it's going to help much. It's just going to have some drag there. So I'm either going to have to live with that extra drag or replace my bolt and start timing all over again. I don't think people talk about, well, you can ring the cylinder. It's not going to ring the cylinder. It's just going to, the most it'll leave a little mark right here. It's not going to ring it. So, and what marks it's going to leave, it's already left. So I don't think it's going to damage the gun to leave the current bolt in there. So I'm probably going to do that for now. If I ever get to the point where I just gotta have a really smoothly cocking Walker. It's got to cock just super smooth the whole way through. Then yeah, I guess I'll have to buy a new bolt. Still see that little bit of drag. It's not much. And that's just one area I'm going to have to just hope it wears in. It's not that much more. It's just, it is so smooth up to that point. And then that last little bit. Well, it was a complete waste of time. Dadgummit. No wonder it's never been tried. Obviously you can kind of see my idea. I was going to try to make a way to make absolutely sure this lever could never drop. I hadn't counted on the fact that the lever, as it's pivoting down, it's moving this hole away from there. So if I were smarter, I guess I would have positioned the hole up higher. But yeah, that was my idea. Was that I would machine a little step in here, a narrower step, and that's irritating. You'd be able to push this from this side, which would unlock it, and then it would lower. But as I've just shown, it lowers on its own regardless. I've not ruined it, but I've not done any good at all. That seemed like such an elegant solution to that problem, rather than most people will file a slight, they'll make this angle steeper so that this lever has a harder time overcoming that. And I thought, well, most of the time I read about that, people say, I almost never have the lever fall anymore. And I thought, I don't want to almost never have the lever fall. I want it never to fall. Well, I've achieved some moderate success. I went ahead and filed a notch in it. And it's moderately successful. Any kind of pin inserted in that hole, the rammer will only get that far before it binds up. I just got back from Lowe's, picked up some brass hardware, polished it up, made it look a little old-fashioned, I guess. Just filed a little notch in this so that it would snug up against that other screw. And picked up a little knurled, this is a 10/32 inch screw, picked up a little knurled nut, hopefully make it look a little bit old-timey. So yeah, that's the finished look. Again, it's not don't try this at home, it's don't try this at all. But because essentially all I've done is cause the mechanism to bind up. I could have accomplished the same thing by just drilling a hole through the rammer and sticking some kind of pin in it so the rammer couldn't move that way. But yeah, the hammer will, the loading lever will fall that far and no more before it binds up on this pin. So yeah, if you're looking for an absolute, it will not bind your revolver up fix, I guess you can try this, but it is not the elegant fix that I hoped it would be. And it's not nice having a separate part that you have to detach from the revolver. If I want to load with a lever, I've got to first unscrew this, take the pin out, and do not lose them. Well, I suppose I can lose them. If you lose them, it just means your lever may fall. And go through your loading procedures, and then when you get done, pop it back in. That's my loading lever fix. And that's what it looks like on that side, and that's that side, kind of a little knob sticking out. That's not too intrusive. Oh no, worst comes to worst, I remove it. File the notch in the spring like everybody else does, and put up with the fact that I got a hole in my rammer that nobody else seems to have. Or go to VTI Gun Parts and buy a new rammer assembly, but I probably won't. Doesn't stick out too much more. Certainly no more on this side than the wedge does on this side. So, All right, beautiful day. Lower 30s, temperature dropping. It was spitting some ice and snow a little while ago. Perfect day to be out shooting. If you recall, we put a cap rake on it, a mechanical stop for the hammer, and this ridiculous appendage, which is my no lever drop mod. Originally designed not to let the lever drop at all, but as you can see, it does drop a little bit. But I've loaded this with a maximum charge. All I could fit in there and still get a wad under the ball. So it's close to 60 grain charge. If anything should drop the lever, this should drop it. This is its inaugural shoot. I'm going to go a little bit closer to the target and see if we can't group with this.
That was a powerful enough charge to dislodge the lever, but the lever mod kept it from protruding into the cylinder and tying it up.
By the way, it was your second shot that it dropped.
Was it?
Yeah, the first shot didn't drop. Second shot it dropped.
Cap rake working wonders. I didn't have a single cap jam with this thing. Felt just like shooting a one of those newfangled suppository revolvers, the type that take metallic cartridges. So, yeah, very happy with this performance. Accuracy was me, but yeah, good feeling. Well, we're losing daylight at the end of the day. This has been very reliable today. This is my last cylinder full. I probably put, I don't know, 8 or 10 cylinders full. It gummed up on me one time. Had to clean it just a little bit. But very reliable. Sometimes the primers haven't been going off on the 1851. So far this one has, we'll see. But, yep, last shots of the day. All 6 without a hitch.
The lever didn't fall either, did it?
Huh?
Lever didn't fall either.
No, it didn't fall that time, so it wasn't a good test of the zebra keeper, but yeah.